Light from the Fingertips, A Symphony of Will. Based on the life of Helen Keller. Chapter 1. The Phantom of Ivy Green. Tuscumbia, Alabama, 1886. The world of 6-year-old Helen Keller was not painted with the azure of the southern sky. Nor did it carry the rustling melodies of the old oak trees. Her world was a dense, impenetrable block of black, a bottomless abyss of absolute silence and darkness. Since a brutal bout of brain fever, now believed to be meningitis, struck her at 19 months old, the doors connecting Helen to the outside world had slammed shut. No light, no sound. She lived as a small, angry phantom within her own home. Helen was wild, untamable. She used her hands to feel. But the sheer impotence of being unable to express her desires turned her into a miniature hurricane. She smashed dishes, clawed at her family, and screamed in guttural, heartbreaking sounds that meant nothing to anyone but herself. Captain Arthur Keller and his wife, Kate, watched their daughter with a rising tide of despair. Neighbors whispered that the child was a hopeless case, a mental defective, whose intellect had died along with her sight and hearing. But deep within that thrashing, small body, a soul was still alive, buried under layers of isolation, screaming to be found. Chapter 2. The Stranger from the North. March 3, 1887, the day that changed everything. A young woman of 20 stepped off the carriage at the gates of Ivy Green. This was Anne Sullivan. Anne herself was visually impaired, having grown up in the harsh conditions of a poorhouse, and she understood darkness better than anyone. She did not bring a miracle cure, she brought discipline and a key. The first meeting was not filled with warm embraces. It was a war. Helen, accustomed to being indulged out of pity, had met her match. Anne did not pity Helen, she respected her potential. Anne began to spell into Helen's hand. DOLLCAKE. Helen mimicked the finger movements. But to her, it was just a monkey-do game. It was a dexterous trick of the fingers, devoid of meaning. She did not understand that these movements represented objects. Frustration mounted. In a fit of rage, Helen smashed the new doll Anne had brought her onto the floor, shattering it. Anne did not give up. She was patient, stern, yet filled with love. She separated Helen from her family, moving her to a small cottage in the garden to break the cycle of tantrums. These were days of sweat, tears, and physical wrestling. Anne Sullivan was trying to drill a hole through the steel wall surrounding Helen's mind. Chapter 3. The Miracle at the Pump. 1 month after Anne arrived. A stalemate. Helen knew how to spell, but she didn't understand why. Until one radiant spring morning, Anne led Helen to the water pump in the garden. The scent of honeysuckle hung heavy in the air, a scent Helen could smell. Anne placed one of Helen's hands under the spout. Cool, rushing water flowed over the small fingers, waking up every sleeping nerve. On Helen's other hand, Anne slowly, deliberately spelled the word, W-A-T-E-R. She did it again, W-A-T-E-R. Suddenly, time seemed to stop. Helen's face transformed. A shockwave ran down her spine. The wall collapsed. That cool something flowing over her hand had a name. It was water. It wasn't just a vocabulary lesson. It was a revelation. In that flash of insight, Helen realized that everything had a name. The chaotic, invisible world around her was suddenly ordered by language. The darkness was no longer empty, it was waiting to be defined. Helen dropped to the ground and touched the earth. Anne spelled E-A-R-T-H. She touched Anne. Anne spelled T-E-A-C-H-E-R. By nightfall, Helen had learned 30 new words. But more importantly, she had learned how to think. The imprisoned soul had found the key to unlock the dungeon. Chapter 4. The Ascent to Radcliffe. If the story stopped at the water pump, it would be a heartwarming anecdote. But Helen Keller was the embodiment of American grit, where one refuses to accept the hand that fate has dealt. Learning language was just the beginning. Helen wanted more. She wanted to go to college. At the turn of the 20th century, it was difficult for a woman to enter university. For a woman who was both blind and deaf, it was considered impossible. But the word impossible did not exist in Helen's dictionary. She set her sights on Radcliffe College, the female counterpart to Harvard. Imagine the sheer magnitude of the task. She could not see the blackboard. She could not hear the lecturers. Anne Sullivan sat beside her in every class, patiently spelling every word of the professor's lecture into Helen's palm, hour after hour, until their fingers were swollen and bleeding. Helen had to memorize everything. She typed her essays on a typewriter in the dark. She mastered French, German, Latin, and Greek. She conquered mathematics and philosophy. There were nights when exhaustion and loneliness threatened to consume her. But she remembered the cool water from years ago. She remembered the light of knowledge that had saved her life. In 1904, Helen Keller graduated magna cum laude. She became the first deaf-blind person in human history to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree. Chapter 5. A Legacy of Will. Helen did not frame her degree to hang on a wall. She used it as a weapon to change the world. The woman who once lived in absolute darkness spent the rest of her life traveling to 39 countries. She gave speeches, painstakingly learning to speak, though it was difficult for others to understand, or having her words interpreted, advocating for the rights of the disabled, for women's suffrage, and for labor rights. She wrote 12 books, including the classic autobiography, The Story of My Life. Mark Twain, the great American writer, once said, "The two most interesting characters of the 19th century are Napoleon and Helen Keller." Napoleon tried to conquer the world with armies and failed. Helen Keller conquered the world with will and love, and her victory remains eternal. Epilogue. No barriers. The life of Helen Keller is not a story about a pitiable disabled person. It is a story about the untapped power of the human potential. Darkness is not found in blind eyes. Silence is not found in deaf ears. True darkness is the lack of vision for one's future. And the most terrifying silence is when we refuse to listen to the call of our own ambitions. Helen Keller proved to America and the world, the only limit to a human being is their will. When you have enough determination, even if the whole world goes black before your eyes, you can still ignite your own torch. If a girl who could not see the sun could become a beacon of light for millions, then you, who possess every sense, what excuse do you have to surrender to adversity? Let Helen's story remind you, never bow your head to the darkness. Find your own water pump, and let the flow of your will lead you to the extraordinary. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe so you don't miss any meaningful stories.